Martino, Bullpen Capital. I'm thrilled Tom is here with me. Tom started this little company a little while ago, and probably some of you have heard about it by now, if you've ever turned on your television. And I'm thrilled he's made the trip by way of both New York and Edinburgh, Scotland. And I think it's appropriate that we're at the Scottish Rite Centre.
Yes, indeed.
So I want to know how many of you out there have ever invested in a company in Edinburgh, Scotland? All right, we got that covered. So, sounds like nobody, Tom.
I thought I saw a hand.
All right.
There was one.
Good. So anyway, so Tom, I want to talk a little bit about fantasy sports and a little bit about the history of the company, because as much as there's been a ton of press coverage on the company recently, we'll get to some of that later, the story of the founding of the company is pretty amazing. And you know, you started as another company called HubHub in the prediction market space, and it didn't work. So tell the entrepreneurs in the audience what it's like when you're in a company and you spend a year or two and you found out, oh crap, this is not going to work.
Sure. Well, that wasn't the first one that didn't work. We had one before that as well. So if you go all the way back to 2006, I was a student. I dropped out to work on a startup called GroupIt, which was a group social networking site. So Facebook was just starting to take off in the UK, and we thought we could do it for groups. That didn't work out, mainly because we spent 9 months in our bedrooms coding, not speaking to customers, not realizing what people wanted. And so, you know, that was the first hard lesson about product development that we learned, which was, you know, you need to be customer focused, you need to get something out there really quickly to get feedback. So we then shifted to focus on HubHub. We'd met a guy called Nigel Eccles in a Scottish pub after a startup event like this, so definitely worth going for drinks afterwards. You might meet your co-founder.
Right.
And we started this prediction market company called HubHub. The idea was it was a news prediction site, so you would make play money predictions about any news stories. So, you know, some were serious, like, you know, the election cycle was happening in 2008. Who's going to be the Democratic nominee? Some were less serious about about Brad and Angelina and when they were going to adopt. And so it was fun, but what we realized was that it had attracted a very kind of unique niche consumer. So people spending hours and hours a day predicting on news stories was cool, but it wasn't going mass market. And so we had a bit of a soul-searching moment in 2009 where we realized if we were really going to build a big business, we needed to pivot.
So tell me what it was like the day somebody said, you know, what if we made fantasy sports one day long? Literally, tell the audience the story about what that conversation was like in the office.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say is that it sounds like it should have been a light bulb eureka moment, but it was a bit more structured and scientific than that. I mean, I think, you know, our backgrounds, mine was in statistical machine learning, our CEO was in math, so we were very just analytical to find, okay, what is the pivot going to be? And so there wasn't the classic light bulb moment or the classic light bulb moment that the media like to portray for a lot of startups. It was really about, let's look at the data, let's see where, you know, how people are using HubHub. Well, it turns out, you know, 60% of the activity is in sports. Why is that? Well, actually, sports lends itself really well to predictions, and a daily cycle was more exciting than a season-long cycle. So we said, well, that seems a bit like fantasy sports. There's this huge, passionate audience for fantasy sports. What if we tried to condense that down to a single day? And we tried that out on a few consumers. So we put ads on Craigslist. We said, if you're into fantasy, you know, we'll give you a $50 Amazon voucher to talk to us for 30 minutes. Let's find out about your playing habits. Let's show you this concept of playing in a single day. And some guys are like, this doesn't make any sense to me. So, okay, we iterated the idea a bit. And we finally locked onto this salary cap format that we have today, where things really went vertical and people loved the idea. And so that was the light bulb moment after, you know, months and months of research, iteration, and experimentation.
So tell me about that. Again, audience is primarily entrepreneurs here, and as a former CEO myself and company starter, what are those days like when you go into the office and you're like, I hope something works today?
Yeah.
Because, people want to be in the spot that you're in where it did work.
Yeah.
And some of them are sitting there right now going, yeah, the room is still pretty dark right now.
Yeah, no, I mean, we know the feeling well. So, Group It was a struggle. We changed to HubHub. It was hard to give that up and pivot to FanDuel. And actually, when you think about the situation we were in, it was 5 of us as founders in the UK trying to launch an American fantasy sports product. The odds weren't looking good. And so, it really just needed a lot of tenacity and optimism to keep going. And I think the process I described around finding the right product was part of our determination not to fail again. We felt that we were going through the right process, we were getting the right signal, and we're following that signal. And so when we started to see it come through in the numbers, I think we made more money in the first month of FanDuel than we did in the first year and a half of HubHub. There was definitely a signal there that we believed in. And so, it was the best set of metrics that we'd seen, and we just kept investing in that. But it was tough, for sure.
And another part of the story that's pretty amazing, too, is you were a company out of Scotland, and you're operating in the United States, and you came to the U.S. looking for money, and it wasn't exactly easy raising money for you guys either.
Right.
So, Nigel, the CEO, has said a couple times, I pitched about 70, 80 firms. I got about 77, 78 no's.
Right.
So what was it like being in the office when Nigel kept coming back going, hey, I did my 68th pitch. I got my 68th no.
Right. I think, I guess we were just optimists, and we thought that we would get there, we would find the right VC in the end. We were just talking backstage about pattern recognition, and Scottish entrepreneurs don't necessarily fit the pattern of what typically people might invest in the Bay Area. And so Nigel would fly out and try to dispel that myth, except that one time, I don't know if you know this story, he was taking a bottle of scotch over for one of our advisors in the Valley, and the bottle of scotch broke on the plane. And so all of his pitch clothes were covered in whiskey, and he had no time to clean them. So he had to go to the pitch smelling of scotch, trying to dispel the idea that Scottish entrepreneurs weren't serious.
That's perfect.
Except that it wasn't so convincing.
Yeah,
so that was one of the no's, maybe.
I could definitely see that kind of undermining the story. But yeah, it really is true. I mean, the level to which venture is a pattern recognition business, and really, in my opinion, one of the great companies of the past decade that you've started, just completely missed by everybody, right? It was, husband and wife, founding team, Edinburgh, Scotland, fantasy sports. I mean, it's like, how many things could you have against you from the pattern recognition standpoint?
Right. No, exactly. And I think another knockback that we used to get was, show me the successful startups in sports, and then show me the successful startups in fantasy sports. It's even more niche. And so it was a really hard pitch. We believed in the metrics, and we needed investors like Bullpen to see that.
Yeah, and that really is true. I mean, the really big outcomes are the Peter Thiel 0-1 style ones.
Right.
I mean, FanDuel is a classic Peter Thiel 0-1. You own dominant share in a market that might not exist yet.
Right.
And if it does exist, well, you're in pretty good shape.
Exactly.
And it's funny, you think that more venture people would be interested in that. It turns out the vast majority of them aren't.
Right. FanDuel was a classic unit economics play. So, we were very analytical in the early days to figure out exactly how much did it cost to acquire a user, how much could we monetize them for. That was, the first number was much smaller than the second number. And so, you turn that handle, you raise more, and you scale it up. And, the early investors saw that, and it worked out pretty well.
Now, there's a weird thing that happens as well. Now that the company has become big and obviously in the news a lot, how weird is it to be a celebrity here in the United States and have nobody know who you are back home because nobody uses your product where you're from?
Right. Well, I get different reactions when you say, one of the founders of FanDuel. Back in 2014, it would be, oh, I saw your ad on TV. And then in 2015, it was like, dude, I keep seeing your ad on TV.
Right.
But no, it's great. I mean, especially when you meet users who play with their friends, with their family, it forms a part in their lives. You see people, they show you their phones, and FanDuel's on their tray of 4 icons that, they're the apps that people use every day. So it does feel great to have created that part in someone's life, for sure.
What was it like literally the first time you saw the ad on TV? Come on, that's got to be
It's
a fun
amazing.
day.
It was amazing. I mean, we were out in a sports bar with friends, and you kind of see it come up, and everybody cheers. It's great.
Great. Well, look, we're going to shift gears a little bit because I know people want to know your view on all the fun that's happened, but I want to almost precursor it this way. You obviously went through a crazy thing since all the regulatory stuff happened, and I was on the board for a lot of this, and so I was right there with you. But what I want this audience to really hear about is much less about the legalistic aspect and more about, so what's it like being the founder of the company when kind of your laundry's on the front page of the New York Times?
Right.
Tell everyone what it's like to keep the morale up in the company, what it's like to go through days when maybe you don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow.
Right. It's a great question, and it's interesting to give that perspective. We often used to have flare-ups of user issues, say on a forum, but it wouldn't go anywhere other than a thread that a few hundred or thousand people read. And then one day, one of those flare-ups becomes a news alert on my phone that's coming from my New York Times app, and it absolutely felt surreal. We've got TVs all around the office that usually show sports, and then we flip them to a news channel, and FanDuel is there in the headlines. We're one of the top 3 stories for several days. And it really was surreal. And I think, internally to the company, we weren't sure how things were going to pan out. But as a founding team and, the experienced management team and, the early employees had been through such a roller coaster ride so far that, yes, it was a big deal, but we kind of kept our heads and just kind of kept the team together, kept working and just, let it take its course.
And so, not only are you watching it on TV, I'll bet mom and dad and your buddies and everybody's calling you on the phone going, hey, Tom, what's that? That's your thing up there.
Right.
And I mean, there's got to be a certain, pride of ownership. You are the product guy of the company. That's your baby up there that everyone's saying these things about. And it almost doesn't even matter who's saying what, but man, they're talking about your kid up there, right?
Right. Well, we always said we wanted to be a household name. I'm not sure if we've pictured it happening exactly like it did, but certainly the brand recognition is massive now. And as we look ahead to the season, we're trying to capitalize on that, make it more accessible for everybody who's heard of us to now come and play.
But let's talk about some of the things that are coming up next. Bambi asked us to talk about what's the future in it. Obviously, backward looking a little bit about the history of the company. What's coming up next? What are some things you're excited about from the product perspective to really innovate and push forward fantasy sports?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've grown so quickly that a lot of our engineering team have been focused on that growth. So, helping scale out the architecture so that we can keep up with 2 to 3x growth every year. And I really feel that the product experience, while has been successful, has got more to come than you can imagine. There is a basic way to play, but we want to make it more accessible to people. So we're making things like beginner contests to make it easy for new users to come in and play, giving people more information so that they can build better lineups. We bought a company over the summer called Numberfire, whose mission is to make sports fans smarter. And so we're plugging their analytics in to help our users. We also recognize that traditional fantasy sports is really social. So 9 out of 10 people play with co-workers or friends. Whereas with daily, it's kind of the opposite. A lot of people play individually to add excitement to the games. And so we're looking at ways to bring in that social mechanic so that you do find it easier to play with friends. So lots of different kind of accessibility features, social features, and kind of longer arc game mechanics to help tie together the weeks so that you can make it feel a bit more like a season. So lots to come.
I think one of the areas most interesting is around the content side. Tell everybody a bit more about Numberfire, and quite frankly, tell them a little bit about the study with the NBA and what becoming a DFS player meant to their viewership.
Yeah, absolutely. So when people start playing FanDuel or fantasy in general, there's a real incentive to consume sports content, whether that's researching your team or once your team is in, watching that team or watching a random game between the Browns and the Jets that you wouldn't have cared about otherwise because you've got a few players in there, second string running back. And so once you start playing FanDuel, what we've seen is that you consume 40% more sports. which is great because our audience is younger than a traditional fantasy audience. And so players like the NBA, our investors in Comcast, multiple teams around various leagues see that we increase consumption of their core product, which is the sports entertainment media. And so we were lucky enough to partner with a bunch of sports teams. We have the NBA as an investor, and they really see that not only is FanDuel part of the sports experience, it's actually starting to change how people consume sports. And we think that that can only grow if we integrate more with, say, OTT experiences for watching live sports. How great would it be if you could see your fantasy scoring right next to the OTT stream of the game? So there's all sorts of kind of interesting real-time content experiences that we can create.
And on the NBA side in particular, to some extent, fantasy sports season long almost doesn't even exist in the NBA.
Right.
It was always a football, baseball game. And, DFS in NBA is every bit as exciting as in NFL. And that's really not the case because there's almost no comparable for season-long NBA.
Right, that's right. Around half of our players in fantasy basketball have never played traditional fantasy basketball. It's a whole new experience for them. And actually the basketball product is great because you've got games every day and the scoring events are so frequent that you can just watch your score almost like a video game kind of ticking up, really kind of driving engagement in that live sports experience.
And so what about other markets? What are your thoughts on international and esports, and there's so many other places the company could go?
Yeah, definitely. So this year is a big year for us. We will be launching for the first time in a new market. We're launching a product in the UK, which is kind of ironic, given that we were a UK company launching in the US and now a US company launching back in the UK. But we think what we've built is, from the ground up, a new kind of fantasy product for the UK audience around soccer. There's going to be a debate inside the company between the UK office and the US office as to which one we call football. But we feel that there are a few differences to how we build the product in the UK. Obviously, there are more choices with regards to real money gaming over there, and so we needed to differentiate. Fantasy isn't quite as prevalent as it is here, but we think if we can combine the two, then we can actually make a new kind of product. And some of the early feedback has been fantastic.
It's funny, their office in Scotland is awesome. There's NFL logos all around, and when you say football in that office, it probably is the only place in Scotland where it means the right thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But it actually is quite fascinating, and you've really built kind of a pretty awesome cross-border culture in your company.
Yeah.
Because it is weird. I mean, the vast majority of the original employees of the company are probably not even NFL fans, which is the biggest market for the product.
Right.
And to see that the way that the company has embraced the culture in which it games in is kind of interesting. Talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's probably the less talked about side of being a founder is, you kind of grow this organization of people and you change your employees' lives. And so, many people from the UK office we've brought over and taken to Madison Square Garden or go and watch their first NFL game, or some of us went to the Super Bowl for the first time. You really do give unique experiences to the employees as well as the users, and that's been really gratifying. Some of our early employees had never traveled out of the UK, and so they're coming to the US having this experience. They've stuck with us through thick and thin, so that's been great to build that culture of travel, new experiences, and broadening people's horizons.
So are you an NFL fan now? I mean, do you understand how there's 100 yards on the field?
Is that how it works?
Do you know how that works now?
Yeah, and they score a goal at the end, is that?
Right. No, but in all seriousness, how many of you, and I know we got only time for maybe one question or so more, tell me, what % of people do you think are actually NFL fans now who are in your office who were not before?
90%, even
90%.
In the UK. Yeah, we have it running on loop all week. We run private internal leagues, and so people really do engage with it. And when they get to come to the US office, typically within their first year of being with the company, they get to experience it live and then they never go back.
All right. One last thing from you, Tom. Give me a prediction for what you think is going to happen over 2017. What's going to be something really cool we see happen in fantasy sports over the next year?
I think it's going to be about groups of friends playing. Traditional fantasy, very friendly. Daily fantasy, not so friendly. Let's find a way to broaden the appeal of daily fantasy and see groups of friends playing together.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Tom. I really appreciate you making the time coming all the way out here. And we definitely have some, I think, some basketball fans in the audience here.
I've heard they've got a sports team or two here in Oakland.
Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks.